Now, onto our generation gap debate, which this week we've had two stories, haven't we, dominating the agenda. We've had Brexit and then we've had the Roald Dahl story. So I'm going to be asking my panellists, is this censorship of literary classics a sign of cultural vandalism? I'm joined by the historian, Dr. David Starkey, who is going to argue, I'm sure, that it is. And I'm also joined by Rebecca Reed, author and broadcaster. We can agree, without being insensitive to your ages, that there is a generation gap here.
Huge.
Dave, all right.
Huge.
Fair enough. Now, David, kick us off, because we've now got another story in the Telegraph this morning suggesting that some of Ian Fleming's books are now being edited. And maybe that's right, because it's different to the Dahl situation. There are some racially very dodgy references in there. But as a general rule, should we be censoring children's books?
It depends on the children's book. I mean, remember, you used a word in your introduction, which is the key word, classic. What a classic mean? Most books die. Most books are your books and my books will almost certainly die. They are things of the moment. When you call something a classic, you mean it's worth reprinting, it's worth surviving, because it is an object out there, and it's for you, the reader, to adjust to the classic, not for the classic to adjust to you. That's why we revive the culture of the ancient world, the original classics. It's why you talk about classical music. And again, I think that the really important thing is, do we see books just as another commercial product? We've got bored. I mean, I read a lovely thing that you did about coffee and Diet Coke. Is it simply a question of I prefer coffee to Diet Coke, or I prefer Diet Coke? Is it another consumer product? If a book is just another consumer product, do you know what? It doesn't matter. Depends what you think it is, what its purpose is, what's even the purpose of getting a child to read.
Yes.
Are we really discussing rewriting Roald Dahl's books because they offend people?
I just don't think anything that's once been created before should ever be altered or changed.
Yeah, no matter what it is. If there's a piece of literature out there, and there's plenty of pieces of literature that are written in an offensive way, or they believe things certain back then that we no longer subscribe to now, but I don't think you should alter them. For what good does that do? You can't erase human history. You can fiddle with words on a book, but you can't change what's happened and how people used to think. How could... This is ridiculous.
You shouldn't have to change it as well.
Besides, Roald Dahl, did Roald Dahl write anything offensive? Isn't Roald Dahl the one that did the BFG?
Yeah.
Big Friendly Giant. I'm curious to see what she's going to say.
The difficulty is that a child reader doesn't have full context. When a child reads something, particularly if they don't have parents who are involved, who are there to have discussions with them, there is a sort of loco parentis role from the publisher to make sure that they're able to read that in a safe way. And I'm not a huge believer in safe spaces for adults, but for children, particularly with children without parents to explain, in some ways...
Be realistic. Is a child that doesn't have a parent to explain going to be given a Roald Dahl? No,
absolutely, because they're in the library at school. They are available everywhere.
But
they're
that's
in
a job.
shops.
But surely, in that case, it's the job of the teacher. The idea that you have a sensitivity reader in loco parentis. I mean, what an absurd notion.
Why is it different if it's a librarian at school or it's a publisher? It's still somebody making a decision about how children should contextualise reading. Ultimately, somebody has to be responsible. The old Enid Blyton books have language in that would be basically illegal to say to somebody now. We have to accept that some books have to be adapted, particularly with racially sensitive language.
Wouldn't it be more honest?
This is illegal.
This is absurd.
To say to somebody now.
It probably has very either racially charged themes in there.
But then it always would have been like that from when we were younger as well. It's not. Yeah. It's nothing's changed in legal terms for it to then not be accepted. Either it should be classed as children's books or it shouldn't.
Oh, man, this is a joke. This is ridiculous. They shouldn't be censoring the work of people that are not... Roald Dahl's not alive. Roald Dahl's dead. You're going to change the person's work. They can't even consent to it. I don't know how we got to this point where we're this sensitive. We read Roald Dahl books in school all the time. We read this book called Of Mice and Men. I can't remember who wrote that, but I remember that had some language in it that people might find a little contentious now, but you do not go back and change classics. It didn't mess us up. It's not going to mess up these kids. Who's messing up these kids are these stupid adults who think they have to sensitivity skim read everything and protect children from Roald Dahl books. Are you kidding me? Like, really? There's even other books that I saw them talking about. I saw them talking about Dr. Seuss, like Cat in the Hat. that's got things in it that is not appropriate for kids. I was just like, man, you guys need to pull your heads out your ass. I mean, they'll scream bloody murder about these things, but then they'll put books in schools that are depicting anal sex between kids and say, oh, it's fine for them to learn that, but God forbid they read a Roald Dahl book.
Wouldn't it be more honest to say, let's abandon them?
What
all this is about, so you've conceded my case. You're saying a book is simply a product.
Yeah, I fully agree. I do think that.
Well, then in that case, we can abandon the discussion. All that we think then reading is a form of child minding. It is no more than giving a child sweets. I think reading is a challenge. I think the reason you're here, and I think the reason I'm here, is that we were once challenged, we were repeatedly challenged in childhood. And the whole point about good children's books like Dahl is that they challenge, that they're not pap, that they're not just Diet Coke. You want to feed your child Diet Coke. You want to feed... You want to feed your child the equivalent of McDonald's. That's exactly what you're saying.
I am not the kind of parent who does that sort of like, oh.
It's a figure of speech, you dumbass.
Can't have conversations with people like that. Like.
The old man's cooking right now. Is his name David? David's cooking right now. Let him speak, okay? I don't want to hear from this. Anything that's coming out of this woman's mouth is going to be some nonsense. I want to hear from David.
Because she knows she's losing. That's why she's coming out with shit like that.
So I wouldn't give my kid that. Shut up. You know damn well what he meant.
I am not the kind of parent who does that sort of like, oh, she's so amazing, she's reading Aeschylus. That's not me. I think reading should be enjoyable, it should be fun. There is no enormous high-mindedness about it. It should be fun and great.
Do you see any place for challenge? Do you see any place...
I do see a place for challenge as an adult reader. As a child.
Shouldn't a child, above all, be going to a parent and saying, explain? I've been told this is a naughty word. Wouldn't it make much more sense rather than suppressing...
But they haven't been told it's a naughty word.
Of course they've been told it's a naughty word.
Let's let Rebecca respond. Yeah. I mean, I think as well, Dr. Starkey makes this point, some of the stuff that was edited out was pretty harmless. You know, I don't understand why it's a problem for children to see depictions of witches wearing wigs and having difficult fingers.
All fairy stories.
Very complicated.
All fairy stories.
Let's let Rebecca in.
You want to abolish everything that's interesting.
Every single fairy story has been changed to make it more appropriate for children with every generation. You do not read, at the moment, you do not currently read children stories where Cinderella's sisters cut their toes off with a meat carver, which is exactly what happened in the original version.
Kids love that
All
stuff.
of you. They do. And I think if you have a safe home with parents who can contextualise it, you can absolutely allow them to have some gore and some fear, but you don't know which child is reading it. And realistically, every single one of these stories, that's the oral tradition. Stories change with every generation.
Before I bring David back in.
But why did you cut witches? What's wrong with reading a book with witches? Do you remember Goosebumps?
Yeah.
That would never survive these days. Goosebumps was genuinely scary, and I think they did it in a way that wasn't so like, to the point of like The Exorcist, for example. You wouldn't put your kid in front of an exorcist, but it was acceptable to let your kid watch Goosebumps. And it was frightening. Alone in the Dark was a bit frightening. And the R.L. Stine books were a bit scary, but they had themes in there that would challenge children and make people think. A lot of the stories that I read today for kids and a lot of the cartoons that I see, they're very like plain Jane. There's not really much going on. And when there is something going on, it's when they're talking about very like sexually charged things that children shouldn't be listening to. But witches, like, I don't understand that. I mean, I heard that they even in Jack and the Beanstalk, or one of those stories, they changed the characters around to not offend black people.
Well, there's a lot of children's films with witches in it, like.
And there's a film called The Witches, isn't it? The one where they've got like long fingers. The one that Anne Hathaway was in recently, but it was an older version. They redid it. I mean, the Wizard of Oz has a witch in it, doesn't it?
Yep.
I mean, there's witches in everything. I mean, there's villainous characters, not just witches. There's mages and there's orcs and there's...
Should we get rid of Casper the Friendly Ghost as well?
Well, Casper's very white, so he might have some privilege that people are not happy about. They might have to change his skin color and change who he was when he was alive to make him more of a victim class that's more acceptable to people. I don't know, like maybe change his gender, make Casper pink instead of white because white's bad. I don't know, change his didn't he have brothers that were quite nasty to him? Change one of them to Donald Trump and change the other one to, I don't know, who do they hate these days? Piers Morgan. Change the other one to Piers Morgan.
She needs Piers Morgan right now, this one.
Yeah, Piers wouldn't let anyone talk here. Piers would just shut down the whole conversation.
Maxim, then, you could be saying to yourself, OK, well, maybe we shouldn't have Cinderella because it might be offensive to kids from blended families. You know, it's got the wicked stepmother and the ugly sister.
People with club feet like me, it's very difficult to put on a glass slipper. But can we just
read Snow White to my child on a consent basis?
Sorry.
What?
I would absolutely avoid Snow White on the basis that I think kissing a passed out person is completely inappropriate. Or I would read it and have the conversation where it'd be like, just so you know, if you're passed out, people...
Oh, shut up, man. Jesus Christ. Oh, my days.
Problems.
She clearly hasn't read Snow White properly. Within the context of the story, it's not like Prince Charming came over and started doing a Charleston White on her and raping her or some nonsense.
I suppose she wouldn't let her kid watch Sleeping Beauty as well.
I don't know what's going on.
Sod it. May as well not even watch Shrek either because it's an ogre. He could kill you.
Well, there was a donkey donkey had sex with the dragon, didn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know how that works, but it's not appropriate for kids.
Or I would read it and have the conversation where it'd be like, just so you know, if you're passed out, people shouldn't try to
Kissing
stalk you.
frogs, I mean...
Is the frog consenting?
Rebecca, come on.
No, but this is real life. People do get snogged when they're asleep.
This is silly and it's pathetic, and you are on the side of the Puritans. You're a new Bowdler. You're a new Paul IV wanting to go and stick fig leaves on statues.
So
aren't you ashamed of it? Isn't yours a generation which is simply pathetic and frightened and suppressing and puritanical? I thought we'd
answer that.
I thought we'd suppress Puritanism.
There are so many. I think
you're a Puritan. Your generation
You're a
of
Puritan.
Puritans.
Boring, tedious Puritan.
All right,
there is a cycle of Puritanism. Some generations are more conservative than others, and that has always been the case. It's moved from generation to generation. However, I would say I'm not being puritanical because I would like children to be able to read stories without absorbing incredibly dangerous messages with no one to unpack it for them.
Define what's incredibly dangerous in, for instance, the twits.
I mean, incredibly dangerous would be overstating it, but in the Twits, there is a whole passage about how if you're a nice person, you will have a nice face and look nice, and if you're a bad person, you'll be ugly. That is a pretty toxic thing to say to children, that people who aren't facially pleasing are inherently bad people. That's not great, is it?
But then in that case, just stop reading Dahl.
But they're great books.
Read what you should be doing. You should be writing exactly like Diet Coke. It wants to be sweet, it wants to be pink, it wants to be absolutely safe, it wants to leave children with no thoughts at all. But a much more interesting question. Are you keen on censorship just for children? Wouldn't you like to see everything censored?
Would you give your child an book to read? Everyone believes in censorship for children. Nobody is saying to children, let's watch Pulp Fiction. Everybody believes on a certain level.
Do they? What about reading the Bible? Right. What about starting...
The Bible is self-fulfilling because it's so boring children don't care.
What about... I think many children have to read it and many more have to read the Koran. The Koran has got much more shocking things in it than Roald Dahl.
But you're still avoiding my point. You must believe in some form of censorship for children.
Get this woman off this show, man. She's just talking a whole bunch of nothing. I don't know. I do not know what is going on. She looks like she's from our generation. You're putting us to shame right now. David's cooking you. He's roasting you. That was nothing but gun. You just fired bare gunshots your way. You're just full of it. Now you got a problem with the twits as well. I would love to go through a list of books and shows that we used to watch as children versus the shit that they're putting on TV now and see what she has a problem with. Because I guarantee you the stuff they're putting on there now, which is actually a problem, she's not going to have a problem with.
Yeah.
But this stuff, the stuff that we grew up on, for the most part, we're not as messed up as what has come after us.
I was just about to say that. Like, we've all grown up on this stuff and we're fine.
We're good. We're good.
We're better than ever.
They want to cancel Johnny Bravo, Courage and Chicken. What was it called?
Cow and Chicken.
Cow and Chicken. Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Cowardly Dog. Yeah.
What was the other one? The little blue ghost. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends or something like that. What was the other? What else did we? I mean, we had
Ed, Ed and Eddie. Dexter's Laboratory.
Oh, they would cancel Dexter's Lab straight.
Codename Kids Next Door.
Yep.
I can go on for hours.
Tom and Jerry. Yep. The Looney Tunes, the Tex Avery show.
Twins.
They'd cancel all that stuff, all the good stuff, all the flavour that we used to get on TV. And they give us this crap now. The crap that they give kids on TV these days and the shit that they give them to read is rotting their brains. But they're happy for them to read that. But God forbid there's a scary episode of Alone in the Dark. God forbid that Dexter's Laboratory has an episode where the fish comes back to life and comes out of the toilet. Maybe it's too scary for kids. They're not happy for children to have these little things where there's like witches or mages or whatever, but they're very, very happy to teach gender ideology. David cooked you, fam. He cooked you.